So to begin, we're going to go through a couple different preemptive steps. We're going to walk through some resources that are available to you as a group of growers that you can go out and hopefully give you some tools so that you can help yourself. So we'll talk through those. We will then dive in and go through clearing out last year's data, go through a software update, and then we'll start to walk through just a refresher on what do all these flashing lights and metrics mean, and how do we best utilize that information as we're planting this season. So first thing to look at is grower resources, and I'll list the three out, and then I'll show each of these three resources to you. We do plan to follow up with an email here in the next day or so that will have these resources. So if you don't get something written down or you're not able to get to it, we will send this information so you can connect with it a little bit later. Cloud.precisionplanting.com is a very important one that we're going to share with you. This is where we house a lot of our technical information that is public to you as growers. This can be accessed from an iPad, from an iPhone. That means as you're waiting for somebody to show up, or as you're waiting on a return call, you can dive out and use a couple of those resources while you're sitting in the cab, and hopefully give you some ideas on where to go. We have a grower text messaging beta. This is something new that we're trying, where you can sign up to receive text messages from our product support group. And those text messages will be videos that come a couple times a week on frequently asked questions. And then the last thing I want to show you is InsidePTI.com. So switch my screens here for a moment. I think we're either lagging or I need to reshare my screen.
I think we're lagging because Inside PTI just came up.
Okay.
There you go.
It's coming. There we go. So this is cloud.precisionplanting.com. And this is probably the most readily available resource for you to take advantage of. As you can see, any product that you may have is most likely right out here for you to access different information. Some of those would be how-to docs, some of those may be install manuals. There's also a variety of videos out there as well. So if I come into my 2020 Seed Sense screen here, and I come underneath Operation Resources, you'll see the Operator's Guide. You'll see a quick reference guide, and this quick reference guide is a very useful PDF to download. You can save it into your iBooks on your phone, and this gives an explanation of what all of the different metrics are, of what they mean. How to change field names, crop types, assigning prescriptions, how to update software. So if I get a little bit far ahead of you today, you can go in here and there is a video to show you the software update process. So some very useful tools to be aware of out on the cloud. The next thing then is looking at the text beta. This is the site that you can come to, info.precisionplanting.com. Again, we will send this link out. And what you can do is you can enter your information, email, phone number. You will tell us which products that you currently have on the planner. That way we're sending you pertinent videos, not just a plethora of random videos of product you don't own. And this is a way for us to send you information on some of those frequently asked questions. The last piece then is Inside PTI. And this is not so much a product support resource as it is an agronomy resource for you to go out and use. So PTI is what we call our Pontiac Research Farm. Jason Webster is our research agronomist, or our commercial agronomist rather, at the farm. And what Jason is doing is he is going through each week and making at least 2 videos on a specific plot that was put in on the farm, and giving the context of what the protocol was like, how it went in, what did the crop look like as it was going through the season, and what were the end results. So this is a way for us to give you context as well as just, instead of just feeding you a PDF with not a lot of extra explanation. So this is another one that you are welcome to sign up for by going to insidepti.com, a first name and an email address, and this would be an email communication that you would receive from Precision Planting. So those are the 3 resources that I wanted to make you aware of to begin with. And with that, we're going to go ahead and dive into doing a software update. Okay, allow this demo to come up. So first things first, to begin the software update process, you're going to have to obviously download the new software. So at cloud.precisionplanting.com, this is back at that original site that I mentioned earlier on. When you log into cloud.precisionplanting.com, you will see on your left-hand side a couple of different gray arrows. The first one is featured resources. The one that is down on your lower left is your 2020 Seed Sense downloads. So you'll want to come into this page. You want to click on downloads. And then under Gen 1, Gen 2, right here, you want to open that up. And here's what we're all going for. This is this 2020.0.0 software. And this is the current version of Gen 2 software. Download 2020.0.0 software for Gen 2 display. This would be the one that you're looking for. It's this top line. Don't worry about the rest of these downloads underneath. That's going to be more dealer specific. You'll want to make your download right here from this link. So it took a little while for this download to happen this morning. So I'm not going to click on it at the moment, but I want to show you a couple common errors that can happen when we're downloading software. So when the software downloads, that will kick it into your downloads folder in your documents, or I'm sorry, not in your documents, but in this downloads section. And so what can happen is if we've already downloaded 2020.0.0 at some other point, it may mislabel that software. So let me walk you back into my computer here just a little bit to show you what that software link should look like. What your software version should read when it comes down, it should be capital DUGEN 2 underscore update underscore 20.0.0 underscore full. This is what you're looking for. This should be the correct file name. If for some reason you go in to do your download and you see a parentheses and then a number off of it, what that means is that this file has been downloaded once already and it's a duplicate file. Therefore, it had to throw in something to make that a unique name so it could save it. If you have a parentheses and any number after that file name, it will not be recognized by the 2020. It has to be this specific file name. If that happens, and I wouldn't expect most of this, I wouldn't expect this to happen to most of you, but right over here, if you do see that, you just click on it to edit the name. And then I'm going to delete out the parentheses, the one, the other parentheses, and even the space. Even a space after the word full will cause that file to be unrecognizable. Once we take it all out, we're going to take this file and we're going to carry it over to a USB stick and store it on the root directory. What that very simply means is when you open that USB stick, you're not making a folder that says 2020 software. It has to go right on the root directory, not inside of any folder, so it can be recognized. So those are a couple of common things, common mistakes that are made when we go to download software. Once you have that on your USB stick, now we can come to the 2020 itself.
May I get back up?
Yes.
Just to the screen here, when we talk about software downloads, since
yes.
we have Gen 1s and Gen 2s here in the room, On the Gen 2, and some of you may not sure if you have a Gen 1 or a Gen 2. If you have a push button to turn it on, that's your Gen 2. So you'd want the Gen 2 software. If you have a rocker switch to go back and forth, you're probably already at 20 or at 17.4, the one you see down towards the bottom there. Mm-hmm. And that's the last one you're going to get. So if you got a Gen 1 and you're already on 17.4, which you probably are, you don't do anything.
Correct. Yep, that's a good point. If you are on a Gen 1, we are no longer pushing out software updates for Gen 1s. Yeah, if you're on 2017.4, that's as far up to date as you're going to go. And as long as everything's still clicking, that's fine.
And even on the Gen 2, unless you've added new components to it, there really isn't a huge need to upgrade if everything worked great last year. But you can, that's not a problem. But there's probably not a huge advantage. There hasn't been a lot of changes on the Gen 2 unless you've added things like flow sensor and things, smart firmers, things like that.
Correct. So let's walk through. I'm going to get a little different background here so it's easier to see the 2020. Should be a little bit easier to view. I apologize, I can't make this full screen. But what you will see is you'll go under Setup. You'll go to Data, Software Update is where you're going to go. Now it's going to say to me, hey, no update files are found. That's because I don't have a USB stick plugged into it. You would plug your USB in, obviously, to begin with. And under Data and Software Update, you should see 2020.0.0 to get you up to date. So once that process has kicked in, and it will take just a little bit of time for that to happen, it will give you a pop-up that says software update complete. Please remove the USB stick and hit OK, and then it's going to cycle power back, and it's going to update that software to the latest version. If you're not sure what version of software you are currently on, the way to find that is from your home screen. You can go to Setup, and then right here, it will tell you version. I'm on 2018.4.0 for my demonstration version. So once that is complete, once your software update is done, now we can come in and we're going to go through the process of deleting last year's data out so that we can keep our hard drive space from getting full and from slowing the performance of the monitor down. So to do this, we're going to go to Setup. We're going to go to Data. And then even before we delete the actual data recorded from last year, we're going to go to Delete. And right down here in the lower left, everybody needs to do this, delete old coverage map data. What coverage map data is, and you'll see that highlighted at the top, old coverage maps. What that coverage map is this is where we have recorded a seed being dropped in that field, and we've got record that this is where you've already planted. So if I don't delete out last year's coverage map data, and I go into that field this next year, it's not going to allow me to plant because it thinks it's already planted. It thinks it's already covered, and we're going to swath everything off. So what you'll want to do is come in here. You'll want to click Delete All. Yes. And that eliminates all of last year's old coverage. One caveat to this. Whatever field you have active in the monitor right now, so if I go back home and I go to Setup and I go to field name here in the upper right, if my demo field is the one that is active, it will not delete the coverage data in the field map data from the previous season if that is the active field. So what you will want to do is you'll want to delete out the coverage map data, you'll want to delete out the planting data, make a different field active. So for instance, this Headland demo. And once I achieve that, now I'm going to go back and I can clear the data out for that one particular field. It's not a big deal if you have one particular field that maybe didn't get deleted. When you pull in, you're going to have to remember to delete that coverage map data. So that's one important thing to be aware of. From the home screen, I'm going to take you back in there. We're going to go to Setup, Data, and now we want to go to Export and Field Map Data. When we go into export our field map data, this is going to give us the option to export all of the data out of that 2020, save it to a USB stick that's plugged into the side, and then save it to the computer. So the idea here, and I can't stress this enough, a 2020 was not designed to be a long-term storage device. This is not an external hard drive. This is designed to be a performance computer in your cab, and if we let that get full, we're going to make it really sluggish. So when you come into that field map data screen, you can do a transfer all, and then you can also do an export all harvest data. So that's going to save the yield data, it's going to save the planting data. Once you have verified that that information is indeed saved to your computer, now you can go in and you can delete out last season's data. You can delete that data out. So if you know it's already saved up in the cloud, you've already got it stored in Climate, or you've already got it stored in our 2020 cloud, then you can go ahead and delete it if you're comfortable with that. So one more time then, I'm going to go back home. I'm going to go to Setup, Data, Delete, and then I'm going to click on Old Field Map Data. And I'm going to come right in here and click on Delete All. So that's the way that I do the final clear of last year's planted information. This does not delete out your field names. It doesn't delete out your prescriptions or your boundaries. It's just deleting out last year's recorded data that was saved into each field file structure. So once we've done this, the way to verify how much memory we have on this device is from our home screen. We can go to Setup, Diagnose, and Display. And what I want everybody to take a look at is what is the disk usage out of a total. So right now I've got 0% of 2 gigabytes used. That's great. That means I've completely cleared everything out. You will always have some percentage in there if you have prescriptions and boundary files that are saved to that monitor. That's okay. But if you're pushing 50, 60, 70+% full, you want to make sure that the harvest data was deleted and last year's planting data was also deleted. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that gets everybody up to date. We will make this webinar available later, so if you're not able to keep up with us right at the moment, you will be able to go back and access this if all goes well later to keep you up to date. So the next piece then that I want to dive into is very simply doing a quick overview or a review of the 2020 home screen itself. And the first thing I always like to remind us of is keep it simple. Green means go, yellow means caution, red means, hey, you probably want to look at this because something's not quite right. So that's a very important thing to remember to keep the operation of the monitor very simple. If you see yellow, let that draw your eye in and focus on that metric and focus on trying to remedy whatever the issue is. So the next thing to remember is there's 3 levels of screen. So we can come in, and this is our level 1 screen. This is the averages of population, singulation, downforce, all the pins, the accelerometers, and the row unit modules or SRNs over here. And if you want more information, you very simply click on the box. So I'm going to click on singulation. That takes me to a level 2 screen, rows 1 through 16. And where I see a potential issue here on row 13, I'm going to click on row 13, and that takes me to the individual row details to help me see exactly what is happening on that one particular row. So a review of what these metrics are and what they mean. Population is very simply the number of seeds per acre that are leaving the backside of that planter. So 30,000 population, if that's our target, I always like to think through it very simply. 30,000 population, we could get that a couple different ways. If we get on our hands and knees, pull out a tape measure, 17 feet 5 inches, and we push a seed in the ground at every 7-inch mark, that would give us 30,000 population on that acre. I could also achieve 30,000 population by putting 30,000 seeds into a 5-gallon bucket, winging it out into a field, and as long as they all fall within 1 acre, that is also 30,000 population. So very simply, population is the rate and only the rate. So for us to understand further whether or not we're getting a picket fence stand, we need 2 more numbers. The next number is right to the right. That is singulation. Singulation refers specifically to meter performance. So the goal is 100%, obviously, if we can get it there. Reality is if you're running an E-set meter or a V-set meter, we should be above 99% at all times. What singulation means is that as every single hole rotates past the seal, or as every finger rotates past the release point into the belt housing, we should have 1 seed for 1 finger, 1 seed for 1 hole at all times. So things that will affect this. Number 1 would be vacuum. Right over here, if I am running a vacuum meter, what I might look at is if I have singulation and I can see that I'm having skips, I can verify that by looking right over to the right-hand side. I've got skips and I've got doubles. If I see that I have skips, I might try to turn my vacuum up just a little bit. If I have doubles, I might back the vacuum down just a little bit. Now with an E-set or a V-set, you're pretty well gonna set it and forget it. 18 inches for an E-set, you're gonna run 20 to 22 inches for a V-set meter. If you're running speed tube, you're actually gonna turn that vacuum up probably closer to 23, 24. A little bit higher vacuum is gonna give you a good crisp hold on the seed so that when it contacts the feeder wheels, it's getting pulled down in nice and crisp. If you're running a different meter, things that you might be looking at is, do I have a knockout that I need to make an adjustment to? Is it too aggressive? Do I need to back it out? Is it not aggressive enough? Is that what's causing my doubles? But I can go through and use vacuum and skips and multiples in conjunction with singulation to make sure that I'm getting the right performance. Once I go past singulation, now I'm going to drop down and I'm going to evaluate my spacing. So what spacing says is, of the 99.5% of the seeds being dropped one at a time, 97% of those seeds in this case have the correct distance from its neighboring seed. So an important indication to remember, an important note to make is, if I get a skip in singulation, that does not affect my spacing. If I get a double in singulation, that does not affect my spacing. And the reason that's important is because if it's a singulation problem, I want you to look at the meter's performance. That's what it's looking at. If you're looking at spacing and singulation is okay, there's going to be one of 3 main things that are going to affect that spacing. Number 1 is, how crisp and consistent are we releasing the seed from the meter to the ground? So if you think about singulation and spacing a little bit like this, think about it from the perspective of that seed tube sensor. That seed tube sensor is an infrared light beam. It's shooting across the center of that of that tube. Every time that light beam is broken, we count a seed. So each blink tells us the number of seeds and begins to translate into singulation. The way we start to look at doubles and differentiate between doubles and misplaced seeds is by looking at the timing. So we see a pulse, we know that's a seed. 60 milliseconds later, there's another pulse. 60 milliseconds later, there's another pulse. 80 milliseconds later, now there's another pulse. What that tells us is there was a delay between those two seeds, and now by comparing to the rows next to it, we can begin to understand whether that was a skip or whether that was a misplaced seed. So again, going back to the three main things that will affect spacing. Number one is the release from the meter. Especially with a vacuum meter is where we're going to see this spacing really crop up. You've got a poly disc that runs on a rubber seal. Poly on rubber or poly on poly will build up static. So especially on those days that are a little bit less humid, we start to run, we build up that static. The seed can cross the vacuum release, but as it crosses that vacuum release, if the static is built up, we'll carry that seed a little bit farther than we meant to, and that can begin to degrade our spacing. So that is why we run eFlow. eFlow is that 80-20 talc graphite mix. The talc in eFlow cuts down on static electricity, which should improve our spacing. The graphite is there to help lubricate that seed pool a bit. The second thing that is going to affect the spacing is the drive system of that planter. Any chains, any hydraulic motors, any ground drive system, any sprocket, any hanger bearing, anything in that system that causes vibration out to the row will affect your spacing. It's just a matter of how much. So as we do this, as we think through that, here's a good tip to note, or a good thing to try to remember. If you see spacing start to change color, and singulation for that matter, what we're going to do is we can dive into that level 2 screen. What we want to identify then is this a single row? Is this multiple rows? Are they multiple rows together? Where do they position themselves? So for instance, if I come in and I see row 7 has high placement errors, but none of the rows around it, what I'm going to encourage you to do is take the meter in the box off of row 7, move it to row 6, move 6 to 7, and if the problem follows to row 6, we know there's a problem in the meter or in the box. There's something there that is affecting how smoothly it's releasing that seed. If it stays on row 7, now we have to start working through, is there a clutch attached to it? Are the sprockets worn? Are the chains starting to get sloppy because they've worn a half link and they're longer? We can start to look at all of those different components. If there is a group of rows together, so let's say I look at rows 1 through 6, all have fairly poor spacing. What I would encourage everybody to do is go and get familiar with where that planter folds, where it flexes, because that's going to help you understand where the drive sections are in that planter. So if I see rows 1 through 6 on a 1770 NT planter show up yellow, that's going to tell me that there's something on that drive line, something on that side that is affecting the spacing down to the ground. It's affecting the timing of those seeds. So I'm going to start looking at the hydraulic drive motor or the ground drive on that row or any chains that are running that whole shaft so that we stay consistent. So population is the total number of seeds per acre. Singulation is how often we're dropping one seed and only one seed down the tube. And spacing says of the seeds dropped one at a time, how many of those seeds have the correct distance between them. The last thing then that will affect spacing, I missed one thing here, is right here, this good ride, row unit ride. So if you recall, each planter has either a set of row unit modules or single row modules. These are the modules on the row that have the seed data going into them. They have load pin data going into them. Maybe a vacuum sensor would be plugged into those. Inside of those modules, there's an accelerometer. That accelerometer is the same device that if you hold your phone up one direction and you flip it sideways, the screen will turn with that. That is an accelerometer that is changing, that is sensing the change in velocity. And that is what's reading how much that row unit is moving up and down. So what we want to watch is we want to watch how our ground speed affects our ride and how our ride is affecting our spacing. So I can see right now that I don't have my spacing parameter set quite tight enough because I'm blazing a trail at 10 miles an hour and my ride's rough and it's not affecting my spacing very much. So if we have this set properly, this should go in and we should begin to see a change in that screen. So the thing to remember, or the way to operate with this information is if you're a grower that says, I always plan at 5 miles an hour, never faster, never slower, I'm going to encourage you to pay more attention to this number this spring, because it could be completely possible that you get into a field that is worked well, it was worked in line with the planting pass, and as you're planting, those row units are riding nice and smooth. Try kicking it up another 0.5 mile an hour faster. If your ride stays smooth and your spacing does not change, try going 0.5 mile an hour faster. Once it starts to degrade and you see that performance drop, now you want to begin to back off. So those metrics become your gas pedal at that point. The last thing over here on the lower left is your downforce metrics. And we're going to get into this in a lot more detail later, but I just want to do a quick overview of how this ties together. Your ground contact at 100% means that the weight pin that is on that row in the depth adjustment mechanism feels strain against it, and therefore the gauge wheel is at the proper depth. So let's look at a picture here quickly just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So you can see right down here on this, right behind the number 1 circle, here's your depth adjustment handle. That depth adjustment handle pivots on a 5/8 clevis on a deer. Every planter is slightly different in how the depth is achieved, but the concept is exactly the same. When your gauge wheel travels up and locks against that stop is a strain gauge. If the strain gauge feels weight against it or strain on it, that means this disc opener right here is in the ground all the way. And there's some extra weight on that gauge wheel. So the thing to remember is our goal is to keep ourselves at 100% ground contact, because that means that each of those seeds should be in at our target depth. If I see my ground contact drop down to, say, 93%, that says 7 feet per 100, roughly, that'd be a rough analogy, 7 feet per 100 is shallow. The first way I begin to pull back incrementally on ears is by putting seeds in at an inconsistent moisture line, AKA an inconsistent depth, and now that begins to affect the emergence consistency of that seed. Once we're in the ground, now there's this margin number on top. And what that margin is referring to is it's saying this is a 3-second rolling average of the extra weight that is on all the rows that have weight pins. And so guys will commonly ask, well, how much margin should I carry? And I'm going to say, well, that depends. Are you at 100% ground contact? Do you have good ground contact? If you don't, you need more margin. If you're at 100% ground contact, but you're at 200 pounds of margin, now I want you to start to back that weight off a little bit and see if you can still maintain it. Now, guys running Delta Force, I'm going to have you kind of ignore that comment. We're going to operate a little bit differently with Delta Force. We'll talk about that just a little bit later on. So I'm going to open it up for any quick questions. Feel free to unmute yourself if you like, and let me know if you've got any questions. Okay, if nothing, feel free to send me a text as well, or a chat message rather, and we'll try to make sure we keep those questions answered. Okay, the next place I want to go, let me bring up my other background quickly, just make this a little bit cleaner for you to visualize. We'll start working through the general setup of the monitor itself. So we're going to begin on the lower right. We're going to go to setup. And we're going to work underneath this planter tab for just a little while. We'll come in here under planter and just do a quick walkthrough on this. If everything worked properly last year, nothing should have changed. There really shouldn't be a reason to go in and change anything here. I just want to remind you of what these metrics mean in the screen. So planter make obviously should be the exact make of the planter that you are running. Number of rows, that would be the total number of rows on that planter. So where this becomes very critical is if you are running a Kinsey planter with pusher units and you can do 30s or 15s, or a 1790, a 1780, a case 1240 or 1245, anything that has a rank of rows that you can pin up or set down, you want that to be the total number of rows. So if I'm a Kinsey 32 row, I want that to be 32 rows here all the time. Spacing should always be 15 inches. It should always be when the total number of rows are being used. Down here, now I don't want you to change anything in this screen until you see the crops page, because that's going to bring a little bit more clarity to this. Active rows should say either all if your soybeans are active, or it might say left or rear or odd if you have a splitter planter. If you're a 30-inch machine, it should say all. If you have a split planter, it may say left, rear, or odd with that, and that's okay. Don't change that here. What the active rows is saying is these are the rows that the 2020 is expecting to see active as far as the seed tube sensors go. So when we're planting corn, it should only see the corn row sensors, or it's only looking for those. When we're planting beans, it should see all of them. Your meter type should very simply be the meter that you are running. Make sure to tell it that proper meter. If you're not sure what your meter type is, let us know. That's something we can help walk through with you. But this becomes important when we go to set whether we're looking for a vacuum or a pressure sensor. So I'm going to say vacuum. Actually, I'm going to say vacuum ESET. Drive type, you're either going to be ground drive, row flow, V drive, or one of our multi-hybrid options. Ground drive, that could be set really if you are truly ground drive, or if you have a different system that is actually controlling the seeding on that planter. So for instance, you have a Pro 700 or a 2630 that is you're running your hydraulic drives, you want to tell the 2020 that you are either a ground drive or other. I usually just go with a ground drive. So I'm going to stick with row flow. My demo doesn't work very well on V drive, but these are very similar as far as setup screens. So hopefully this is still pretty clear as we go. The downforce system type, that's either going to be air force or delta force or some spring type. I'm not going to dive into a lot of detail there, other than if you're not quite sure if you have the right one, let us know, and we'll help you out on that one. But this is telling us that we're actually looking for solenoids back on those rows for the delta force. If I have air force down and lift, it's telling us that that we should have a set of solenoids that are controlling a down circuit and a lift circuit. Fertility system, if you're running vApply HD or vApply or FlowSense, you could choose one of those, or row flow liquid. If you're not sure what you've got, reach out and ask us. Otherwise, select one of these options. So I'm going to go with vApply HD so we have the option to set that up later. Insecticide system, that's really going to only apply if you have V-Drive insecticide. Soil system, if you are running smart firmers, you will want to tell us that you do have a smart firmer on it. It will either be none or smart firmer. So make sure to have smart firmer active. Downforce sensor type should change with the planter maker model, and if you change the make, that will ask you to tell it what type of way pin you have. So where this becomes important is we have to tell the system that we have the right way pin in it, because that tells us what to expect As we see a change in voltage from that pin, we know how to interpret the calibration of that particular sensor. Down at the bottom here, you're going to see effective row spacing and effective planter width. Your effective row spacing is what we are using to calculate your population. So where this comes in, where this becomes important is, again, on that splitter planter. You're up here at 16 rows and 15-inch spacing, but when corn is active rows should be changed and you should see 30-inch. It will calculate population on 30-inch. If you're on soybeans, this will change to 15-inch. It'll toggle between them. Effective planter width is 40 feet. So that is what we're using to calculate population. Or I'm sorry, not population, but rather acres that we've covered. So that's a quick overview of that screen. Where I want to go next then is to go into the crops setup page and to show how these two really interact. So for the sake of display, so I can show this, bear with me, I'm going to switch over to a Kinsey. And I'm going to make this a 32 row. And I'm going to tell it it is a 15-inch planter. And I can now show you that we have a 15-inch effective row spacing. So we're going to calculate all those seed pulses as if we're on a 15-inch row, and we are a 40-foot planter. If I made this 31 rows, that would actually be 38.8. So we'll change and toggle that. However, you're not going to change that here. So once we have this set, we're going to go enter, and then we're going to come over to this crops tab. One moment. Sorry about that, taking a moment to get my voice back here. So when I come into my active crop, I'm going to go ahead and have everybody start with their active crop as corn. So right now, if you have soybeans active, I want you to go over to the right-hand side, click on Change Crop, and you'll click on Soybeans. If you're on soybeans, I want you to go to corn, so obviously change back to corn. So I want everybody to start on corn here. This is where we specify how the planter changes and what to expect with those changes by crop. So for this example in particular, I'm going to say that I'm actually a V-set meter on this Kinsey planter. I wouldn't have an E-set on a Kinsey. So I'm going to say that I've got 27 holes per disc. That is our standard corn meter. You want to make sure that you have the correct holes per disc for whatever meter you're running. John Deere Pro Max 40, you should be 40. For an E-set, that should say 30. If you are on a finger meter, that should say 12. If you're not sure, you want to pull a disc and you want to count the holes and enter in the right number of holes. That's going to tell us or give us indication of once we see 27 seeds coming down a seed tube sensor, that helps us understand that that was one revolution of that disc at that point. Default population. The default population is the population that your drives, either row flow or V drive, will default back to if you get outside of a prescribed area. So if you are planting with prescriptions, and let's say that prescription is made a little bit too small for the actual field extent. As you plant and we're commanding through that prescription, if you exit that prescribed area, that motor is going to say, well, what should I plant? And it's going to go to this default right here. So one thing to make note of, if you click on that default population, you can change it to whatever you would like. But on the right-hand side, you'll see out of prescription, current, or default. If this says default, it is going to go to this default population that you've set. If you go to current, that is going to say whatever you were doing last, whatever I was last commanded to do. Say I was planting 36,000, I get outside of that area, it will continue to plant 36,000 until you get back into a prescribed area that tells it to do something different than before. It'll just keep doing what it was doing last. So you've got that option if you would like to change it. Your active rows. If you're on a 30-inch machine, this should be all. If you have a planter that has pusher units or splitters, rather, you can come right in here under corn. On a Kinsey, it's going to be the left side of the harness or the rear rows. On a 1790 or on a 1240, that would be odd. And so what that's telling the monitor to do is it's saying, hey, you're just looking for the seed tube sensors on the odd rows or on the left/rear rows. So where this becomes important is when I come back to my planner tab, and you don't have to follow me there, I just want to show you what's happening. You can see now that my effective row spacing is 30 inches and my effective planter width is 40 feet and my active rows are left or rear. If I go back into my crops, and I'm going to change this now to soybeans, now that soybeans are active, I'm going to come back to my planner tab and into planner and notice that I'm now 15-inch spacing and 40 feet wide. So the key that I want to remind you all of is you only have 4 button pushes when you go to change crops. You should only have to push 4 buttons. You go setup, crops, change crop, and then make active whichever crop you want to make active. Then change out your crop kits, and then you're off and going. So it should be a very simple process now. I understand it's very simple now, but you'll forget it when you get there. You can go out to the cloud, go out to cloud.precisionplanting.com under 2020, that Gen 2, and there will be a video out there that will show you how to change that crop type. So remember, those resources are out there. That'll save the BLS team a few calls. You're welcome to call, obviously, if you need to. But if you can help yourself, that might speed the process and open up some bandwidth just a little bit.
You bet.
So finishing out the corn crop, swath coverage pattern. If you come in here, just a couple quick reminders. Your offsets on this left-hand side are telling the 2020 where to target the drop of the last seed. So as you come in and you're planting into a headland or into a point row, if I have no offset, it is going to try to land that seed directly on the row that was planted on the furthest left or furthest right, depending on which way you were going, obviously. If you do a half row offset, it is going to target half of your row width away from that first row. So on a 30-inch row, you're going to be off back 15 inches as your target. You can do a full row offset, or you can do a custom, where you can enter the number of rows or a fraction of the number of rows that you would like to do. So my recommendation is to have everybody start with no offset. And that is so when you go to dig to determine your swath timing, your calibration, that you're not making the mistake of forgetting that you told it that you wanted to aim 15 inches back, and now you're trying to put a measurement in to make it meet on the line. That's not what you told it to do. So in general, start with that no offset. Now, once you dig and you verify that you like those clutches, by all means, come into that swath control setup, half row offset, and now you're off and going. On the right-hand side, this gives you your options for if you have any rows that are paired together, or let's say the most extreme example would be you have half-width disconnects. And so half that planter comes in and we're controlling those disconnects. If you're underplanting, that's saying as soon as the first row of the section hits, turn it off. And so that's going to leave a triangular gap on the inside of that field for however many rows you have. If you are 50-50, that's going to say if row 1 and 2 are my swath section, it's going to say as soon as I get in between or to the middle of that swath section, I'll turn off. Or you can do an overplant, and that's going to say I want to completely overplant and make sure that I don't leave any open spot here. So that's your swath coverage pattern. You can set that differently for each crop as you would like. Your quick adjust population. What this quick adjust is doing is when you come into your row flow or your V drive control, I'm going to toggle off of variable to manual control. I can increase my seeding rate by 500 seeds at a time by just clicking up and down. So I can come in here, I could go to 38,000 and say, no, I want to do 37 by hitting my population adjust twice. If you want to change this number for whatever reason, you can go back into that crops tab and change your quick adjust population from 500 to 1,000 or 250, whatever you want those increments to be. Quick explanation on seeds to average. When we give you a percentage on the home screen, I have to look at some number of errors out of a certain pool of seeds. So we use a 300 seed average. So let me jump back to this home screen. If I had 99% singulation, and if my seeds to average was 100 for easy figures, that would say if I was at 99%, I had one skip or one double out of the last 100 seeds. Our seeds to average is actually 300, so 99% would say that we had 3 skips or doubles out of the last 300 seeds. Now that is a rolling average. We are looking at every seed. So when you start a new field, you sit down and you begin to plant, you're gonna go from 0%, you're gonna build up. That first 300 seeds is gonna give you the first full percentage. And now we're gonna look at seed number 301, take off the first, 302, take off the second, 303, take off the third. And that's a rolling average for each of the seeding metrics on that home screen. Down underneath that crop, now we can set our alerts. Most of these are preset, and we probably don't want you really messing with them. Leave them where they're at, but we can go in and we can look at a few of our limit adjustments just so you understand the theory of what they're doing. A limit means that is the limit at which we will go from green to yellow on the screen. So my population limit of 1,000 says right here, 37,000 is my target. Once I get below that by 1,000 seeds, now we're going to turn the screen yellow. And that also is what's setting this scale down here, 36,000 and 38,000. So it's splitting this side to side. Now, this demo is set for a 16-row deer, and I'm set up as a 32-row Kinsey. So that is why things are looking as goofy as they're looking. Your population alarm is what sets off, she's gonna blow, Captain, or somebody yelling or some sound trying to get your attention. That alarm will go off if you fall below 20% of your population target. That's where that alarm will trigger. Your singulation limit at 98.5% will turn yellow. Good ride at 90%. Spacing at 93. Ground contact at 95. And this just gives you a good parameter to where each of these is set. Right down here, you'll see misplaced seed limits. So a quick explanation on what that misplaced seed limits is. And we'll begin with, let me start with a chart. This misplaced seed limits chart is available to you. It is in the 2020 manual. If I remember right, it's like page 37 or something like that. It's probably still wrapped in the cellophane underneath the tractor seat, most likely. If you want this document, let us know. We can send this to you as a reference sheet. Actually, I'll make a note here to send this and make it available. Okay, the way to read this chart is you'll begin by looking for your row width. So I can see if I'm on a 30-inch row, and let's say I'm planting at 34,000 seeds, between 34 to 35. At 34,848 seeds to be exact, we're at 6 inches between seeds. As we follow this line across, this is going to give us a speed from 3 to 8 miles per hour. This is very simply the number of seeds per second that are traveling by that seed tube sensor. And then we can come into misplaced seed limits. There's an economic setting and there's a minimum setting. For planting purposes, we want to be in the economic setting. So this is going to say, set us at 2.8 and 4.5. So let me walk through what that means. If I have 6 inches between seeds, if this is 6 inches between each one, let's just draw it in there. Apologize for the sloppy mouse work here. My parameters were 2.8 and 4.5. So what that means is if I get a seed that is within 4.5 inches of its neighboring seed, the referee is going to throw the penalty flag and that spacing screen is going to turn yellow. So what that tells me is if I get this seed right here within 4.5 inches of this neighboring seed, ref throws the flag. Well, that means that I am 1.5 inches off of my target. So as soon as, I'm sorry, I should have drawn that the other way around. As soon as this seed, if we were traveling this direction, as soon as this seed gets 1.5 inches off, it's now going to flag you and say, hey, you're too close. So that's what that misplaced seed limits is. The bigger number is what you're more concerned about, the 4.5. What the smaller number is we call this a severely misplaced seed, and that docks you higher in the economics metric is where that one comes from. So that's just to give you a little bit of an idea. If you do a fairly significant population change, let's say you're planting 30,000 in one range, and then you're going to 34,000 in the next field, I would recommend going in and changing those misplaced seed limits so that you know when you're in off or so from that particular seed. Got to go back in and reshare my screen here. I'll be right back. Okay. Bring up my background in the 2020. SRI limit. SRI is a little bit different spacing number. That is a statistical measurement of seed spacing. Most of you have good spacing up there, so I would probably stick with that one myself to begin with and just change those misplaced seed limits as needed. What you will also see in this screen under your crop, you have smart firmer alerts and you have liquid alerts. So your smart firm alerts, this is going to tell you at what point you're going to turn the screen yellow with temperature is going to be 55 degrees. The alarm will go off at 50 degrees, and we were going to see about putting another one in that says stop the planter at 45 degrees, but R&D didn't quite work that one in. Clean furrow alert, 95% for the alert, 90% is the alarm that will go off. So it just gives you a little bit of an idea. I wouldn't recommend coming in and changing these per se. But if you are, for some reason, you're in a field that's, say, corn on corn, or you've just got a tremendous amount of residue, you know it's there, you can't move it with the row cleaner. That's what you would try to do first, is adjust that row cleaner. And if that alarm is driving you nuts, you could come in here and you could drop that alarm lower. And that's how each of these are generally set. Liquid alerts the same way. These are your parameters for liquid. So I'm going to change from corn, change crop, and now we're going to go into soybeans. Soybeans on our seeds per disc. Obviously, you need to know what kind of meter you're running. If you're running a John Deere cell disc, that's 108. If you are running a VSET, you're going to be running either 80 or 56. So a note on that, that 80-hole disc, it's a great disc, and it has 2 tiers of holes drilled all the way around the outside. And the idea behind that is that was really designed as a one-size-fits-all to allow us to go high population and high speed with speed tube. A lot of us now are going to the 56-hole disc with VSET. And that 56-hole plate is a green disc with a single set of holes. And that would allow us to go up to 10 miles an hour at 140,000 population. So what we like about this disc in particular is it does do a bit better job at dropping seeds more consistently. Spacing wise from seed to seed, if we get low enough population, we will even see singulation come up on it. So I know a question Scott asked earlier, and I'll have him interject a little bit here too, is who should be running that 56-hole plate, and what ranges can we do? If you're on speed tube, you're going to max out your speed at about 10 miles per hour and 140,000 population. Now, you can do 160, but you might have to slow down to 8 to get that done. If you're going standard speed, you can take that 140,000. If you're running 5 instead of 10, you can double it. So you can theoretically hit 280,000 or so. But any comments or things to add there, Scott?
No, I think you covered that real well. We do have a lot of interest going to the 56. Singulation's a topic of discussion on soybeans. There've been quite a bit of trial work and other things done. So just to let you know, that is an option. You can use that 56-hole disc on the B drive system, BSET system. And your limitations, like I say, 10 mile an hour, 140,000. If you need to go to 160, back it down a little bit, go 8.5. Maybe you can't quite get 9. You still can get there. So we still can hit some higher populations if you get some situations that desire that. Otherwise, if you want to drop down and actually try to really singulate soybeans, the 56-hole disc is an option for that.
Yep. And one note, so singulation is a theoretical thing that we're after. One thing to remember, singulation most often with soybeans will have 2 dashed lines. And the reason for that is once we get above a certain number of seeds per second past the sensor, we can no longer, the algorithm that figures out a skip versus a double versus a misplaced seed really is statistically insignificant. So singulation and spacing will go to 2 dashes, but you will still see a population come up. Now, if you go to lower populations, you get to 100,000, 80,000, and the right speed, singulation may show up from time to time on soybeans. We will actually get it into that range where we're dropping few enough seeds to where we can start to distinguish that.
And singulation of soybeans equaling higher soybean yields, that one's not quite proven out yet. We got a good concept, but I'll put my farmer hat on, and I'll tell you, we haven't seen that consistently be the case. They look nice though.
Yeah. Well, what we really like about it is kind of the theory with anything with soybean management. The general trend in the marketplace is how low can we go in our population to save seed costs and seed treatment costs. So if I figure every 10,000 seeds less per acre that I plant saves me about $5 an acre. So if I can go in and drop 20,000 population, that's a very quick return back in my pocket. To do that means that I have to get every single soybean that I plant up more reliably. And so that's where the singulation, the spacing, and really the downforce becomes really critical, is even if there's no yield bump consistently from it, there is a readily available return on investment through being able to drop populations. So good conversations for sure, and good things to try. I would encourage everybody, go out, run your standard population and drop that population for a few passes and just see how low you can go before it starts to affect you. Your default population is the same as it would be conceptually for corn. Make sure that you get that set so that when you get out of the prescribed area, you know what we want it to do. Active rows should be all. Swath coverage pattern, you would set that to your preference. Your quick adjust population is 1,000 and seeds to average is 1,500. So that's your crops tab. And remember, you've just got to switch to change crops. All you're doing is change crop and go to the different active crop. Let's go back to our planner tab, or actually I'm going to take you home first. We're going to go to setup. And now we're going to come into field name. So with field name, a few quick tips. We won't spend a ton of time on this, but remember you've got your client farm field hierarchy. The client in general is who you're farming for. That may be yourself. If you have multiple clients, if they have a north farm, a south farm, an east farm, or west farm, or if they've got multiple people in the family, you can set up varying farms. You could have one client, one farm, that's fine, and you could have a whole bunch of fields underneath the one farm. The keys to remember here are that when you go to name a field, once it's named, that field name should remain sacred. You should not change it. So my North 80 field here, for instance, I want to leave that named North 80. I do not want to call it the North 80-2020 corn or North 80-2019 beans. The problem with that is when you put that into a software later, those two different names will not allow that field to associate, and you can't layer that data together because it thinks it's two different fields. It uses that field name as the differentiator. So what indicates whether it is corn or beans is the crop type that you change it to after you make that field active. What determines the year is the GPS time and date stamp that is coming up and giving you indication that, hey, this is the time and date that this is being planted. So you don't have to put any qualifiers to that field name, just keep the field name sacred. When I come into a field, and general best practice on this is I personally like to have kind of a junk field or a field that I call transport or test or something of the sort. And I'll give you the example from earlier this week. I was helping a dealer and a grower set up a Gen 3 sensing architecture. We were sitting inside of the shed, and he didn't have a good GPS connection. And so the implement was actually turning in circles while we were sitting inside of the shed and acting as if it was planting seed because we were running a brush by the seed tube sensors. Well, one of his actual fields was active. And the problem with that is if he would have driven to that field 2 or 3 miles away and he had seed pulses in the garage, it's going to think that field is over 3 miles wide. And it's not, and it's going to give him some problems later. So what I like to do is, now you can go into that field. You'll see here on the right-hand side, delete coverage map. And that's very simply what we did for him. Is we looked over and said, hey, things we're planting, let's delete that coverage. If the habit is, as soon as you fold up, you go into your transport field. Now you can transport, you can road, go everywhere you need to. And when you pull in, now you're going to make the next field active. So that would be my general recommendation. Pull in, make your field active. And you can see by selecting that field, you'll click Make Active right up here. Going back into the field, this is also where you assign prescriptions and boundaries. So let's talk through those for a moment on what those different files are.
I don't know if that's widespread.
Okay. Yeah, I got a comment here that the audio is breaking in and out a little bit. I do keep getting a message here that says our internet connection is a bit poor. So I apologize if it's kind of kicking in and out. If this is really rough, Like I say, we do have another webinar that we can send out with largely the same information. So keep us in the loop if something does break up, or if it's a consensus across the board. So the difference between a prescription and a boundary. So the first thing to note, I'm going to unassign these. I do have to create a prescription or a boundary, either this season or have one from the past that I can bring in, and I have to assign those. So bear with me for, actually, no, I think this will work. One moment. So somebody had asked, can you call via cell phone landline instead of the computer? Possibly. That might take me a second here.
Will that be able to do that?
Switch to phone audio. Yeah, bear with me for a moment here. We'll see if we can make this work. Now the problem with that is I don't have my headset in here, so I'd be going off a speakerphone. I've got it in the truck. Okay, just a second. We're going to try this and see if this comes in just a little bit clearer. Bear with me for a moment. Thanks.
In the meeting, this meeting is being recorded.
Okay, I'm using my phone audio now. You guys tell me, is that any clearer? If you can send me a message. Okay, yeah, it looks like maybe that's a little bit clearer. So we will run with that. Thanks, everybody. We won't use the internet to transfer our audio. We'll go off the phone. Okay, so what I want you to notice here now is as the planner goes back and forth, remember this planner is not, I realize that the swath is not set up correctly, or the width of the planner is not correct. We have our demo off just a little bit. But what I want you to notice is the background color. It's got this lime green background with a darker lime green going over the top. What that tells me is wherever I'm at in that space, it's going to allow me to plant just at a straight rate. If I want to prescribe a rate, I have to make a rate active by assigning a prescription to the field. So I'm going to go to Setup, Field Name, go into my active field, and I'm going to go to Seeding Prescription. I can now come in and I'm going to choose my row flow demo population. It's going to ask me for an attribute. So that's saying, okay, what are you looking for? What does this do? That's going to change based off of who made the prescription and exactly how it was set up. But it'll normally be seeding rate or population or something of the sort. Now, when I come back to my home screen, you can see that we are prescribing a rate for those motors to execute. And that's the same whether this is a row flow hydraulic motor or whether this is a V-drive electric motor. Prescription prescribes the rate to the field. If I want it to swath, that has nothing to do with my prescription file. That will not cause me to turn on and off. So what we're going to try to do is we need to assign a boundary to this field. So I'll do that here. I'll go to Setup, Field Name, back into my field, Boundary File, and I'm going to go to Row Flow Demo Boundary. Now when I make that active,
you can see the gray area on the outside and on the inside. The outside signifies an external boundary. The inside is my internal boundary. Now, again, my demo doesn't show it quite right. It thinks that the master plant switch or the master swath switch is off, so it's not going to swath properly. And the reason the coverage is goofy is because this is meant for a deer and I'm set up as a Kinsey. So it should obviously look quite a bit cleaner than that. But you can see the effect that the two different files have and the purposes that they are there to do. Now, with that being said, let's walk through just a little bit of a couple ways we can manipulate and change this. So if I come into either row floor or V drive, thanks, and I go to population control, right now I am on variable. So that says I've got a variable rate script that is there. It is enabled, and you can see my current prescription and my next rate that is prescribed. If I toggle this, if I touch on it once, it'll change it to manual. Now I can come to any of my preset populations, and I can change this manually. So I want to plant 34.5, and I can do that very easily by just doing a manual adjustment. If I want to toggle that back on, I can go to variable. One more thing I want to show you is we have the ability to do multiple population sections. And so you can see right over here, it says single. I can change this to multi, and if I have configured this to be motor 1 left and motor 2 right, if I have 2 drives, I could plant 2 different straight rate populations at the same time. I can do the same thing with V drives. So for the guys that are doing seed corn, the way that we would do this, and I'll walk you through the screen a little bit later on what this looks like, but we can set up multiple rate sections. We could have 3 or 4 rate sections, and then we can tell different rows on that planter to plant different populations at the same time. Going to toggle this back to variable. The next is our swath control plan. And that swath control plan is telling us what we're controlling to. So the reason my demo is not working is you see there in red, it says switch off, and I don't have a switch on the screen to be able to flip it on and to make it swath. But what it is controlling to is the 4 items that you see underneath: a field boundary, an inner boundary, map coverage, and simulated headlands. So the field boundary is this external boundary around the outside of that field. So if you're one of those that you tend to drift a little bit, or the GPS receiver can walk a bit on you and you turn off that outside row, one way to change that would be to touch on your control plan, get rid of your field boundary, save that, and now the external boundary is no longer controlling that. The other way to do this would be to come into your control plan, leave that active, and on your CAD control module would be just to flip the swath control switch down as you're going around that outside pass. Now remember, when you go through the partial portions of it, that it'll overlap, but that would be another way around that challenge. Inner boundary, very simply, means we're using that inside boundary that we designated by driving earlier. Map coverage says anywhere that we have covered the map with that planter, if we go over that area again, we will turn off the seeding control. We are not going to double plant where that seed is being placed already. And then the last is simulated headlands. So real quick overview on this. We can come into advanced swath tools over here on the right. And when we bring that up, assuming we already have a boundary file associated, we can come right here to this headlands. Let's say that I am a 40-foot planter and I want to leave my headlands for last. What I could actually do is I could come in and say, I'm going to make 2 passes and I want a field boundary for my headlands. And what that's going to do is it's going to offset in 80 feet from the outside, and it will plant in the middle. and it won't plant in the waterways here or anywhere out in this outer area. Once you plant the middle, you could run tillage on the outside, get rid of your tire tracks, and then you could come back in, remove that, and plant the headlands last. So another option out there, not a lot of guys have used it, but it is something that has been used and is a pretty neat feature. So I'm going to come back home, come back into setup, and into field name. And that should pretty well complete most of the features that you're worried about in here. You can see the client, the farm, the field name. You can enter in the field acres that are expected. This entrance here, if you pull into that entrance and you touch, you can use current GPS, and that will remind you in the 2020 where that field entrance is in the future. It's just a reminder to help pull that up. Along that comment line, I know many of us are using Field View, and Field View has an auto boundary detect feature. And just one comment to make, I hear this quite a bit, is, hey, if I've got two fields that are side by side and I'm planting along, and if the planter drifts a little bit, Field View will prompt me and say, hey, do you want to make this the active field? I don't exactly read the pop-up that comes up. And when you go to hit OK, you're now leaving that, you're planting into the wrong field file. So if that has become an issue, you can go into the map selector in Field View and you can disable that feature. So I apologize, I don't have a way to show that on my screen right now. But if that is something that's kind of bit you in the past, then you can reach out to Bottom Line here, and they can walk you through the process of disabling that feature, so you don't get that that swap between. Got a couple, one comment and a question here. So best way to bring boundary files in from another source, question mark. Okay, so probably your best way to bring in those boundaries is via USB. If you have boundaries in SMS or SST or FarmWorks or something of the sort, you can export those as a shaped file to a USB stick, plug that into the 2020, and then what you're going to do is you're going to go to Setup, Data, and you're going to go to Import, Prescription and Boundaries. Now, if you're one of those that you get new prescriptions every year, something of the sort, you probably want to go in and delete out last year's prescriptions ahead of time, just to try to keep things as clean as possible. Oh, I have another comment here. This is an interesting one, is simulated headlands is also a useful feature if you're running multiple planters in one field and if the swath sharing isn't working properly between the machines. So that would be a way to do it as well, as if you've got one planter doing the headlands and the swath isn't going across properly, you could create a simulated headland and that second planter would work off that mock boundary. So, no, good point. Thanks, guys. Okay, next I'm going to jump to this population screen. Okay, on your population setup for your set points, there's a few different options. There's a single setting, multiple settings, or you can go to specific rows. So if you've got a different monitor that's doing seed corn, you can assign different population set points to different rows. Single setting, where I would recommend using this is for anyone that is has a different system that is controlling their motors, or if you're ground driven, I would probably stick with a single set point. What that set point is it's setting the middle mark on your population screen right here. And so if you get off of that target by 1,000 seeds, we turn the screen yellow. We want to know that. So if you have multiple set points under this population, and let's say that the drive system kind of goes out of whack and it starts to under or overseed, if you have a bunch of set points in there, it might drift up to your next set point and tell you you're just fine, and you may not notice that is a problem at the time. Now, if you've got a different monitor that is controlling your drives and you're doing variable rate scripts, now you may want different population set points in here so that when it is changing those rates as you go, that the 2020 knows to drift to those set points and knows that those are acceptable. The last place then is if you're using RowFlow or if you're using vDrive, you can enter in any of the set points that you would like to have essentially as presets in that monitor. So when I come into my RowFlow and I change from variable to manual, here's all the set points that I've entered in that page. So you can have your corn set points to start with, and then you could have a couple soybean set points down there if you would like, and then you've got everything at the push of a button. Last thing then on this tab is to touch on corn hybrids or soybean varieties. Really the same type of perspective with both of these, are the same approach. So when you come in to that setup, to add a new hybrid, you very simply select from one of the categories underneath. So if I come in just to this first one, I can add hybrids very simply by coming to this upper right-hand side, click Add Hybrid. So if I want to add a new hybrid, I can begin typing, and you'll notice that this starts to narrow down up top. My recommendation is, as you begin typing, select your hybrids from the drop down up here if you're using just a standard hybrid name. And what this prevents, or what this helps with, is it keeps us from coming in and choosing DeKalb 6427. If you come in and you re-enter that in the same year as lowercase d capital KC 6427, any electronic system out there is going to notice that as two different hybrids. So by choosing from that drop-down list, keeps our data integrity a little bit better and helps us line up any of the field reporting opportunities later on. You'll hit enter, and then you're going to tell it where those hybrids, what rows we should record that hybrid on. So I can say all. Now, the 4 columns here tell me that we can do 4 different hybrids at one time and record all of those at once across that planner. So as I come in, let's say that I have, I've got this DKC 6017, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to put this on the left. And now let's say that I've got DKC 6017, you can see pop up 3 gallon. Now what I did there is I went in to add a hybrid and I just start typing DKC, and then as it comes, I'm just going to keep typing across, and I can call that hybrid whatever I want it to be and add it as a custom hybrid. So where I might do that is in a side-by-side test of one hybrid versus another. Or I might come in and say, hey, this is 6017 with pop-up at 3 gallons. I labeled it as that, and this is on the right-hand side. And now what you can see is that planter will be split left and right. So now I'm running my starter here. The starter is off on this side, and I've got a test strip. You could do the same thing more often if you're doing a starter strip or something like that. You would come in the full pass at this 6017, and then you come in the next full pass and make this hybrid active. But where this is important is you can come back later with the hybrid tracker, and as you're combining that crop, it's going to dump those into their own buckets, and you can start to evaluate how each different treatment yielded at the end of the year. So my encouragement is, if you've got side-by-sides that you would like to do, if you've got ideas for things you want to test, put those custom hybrid names in ahead of time, so that when you get out to the field, all you've got to do is change that active hybrid at the end of the field and start planting. So that really is our planter tab as a whole. The next piece I want to go through is I want to come to this systems tab. And the first and most important place to jump in and begin with is under GPS. Again, if nothing has changed from last season, you shouldn't have to change it now. But if your planter changed, if your tractor that's pulling the planter changed, if the GPS globe, or if the position of the globe changed on that tractor or the implement, we need to come in and we need to re-enter those measurements. So we'll start up here at the tractor.
It's still a good practice, even if you haven't changed, to go through this exercise, because you never know when a number might have gotten switched or got rekeyed in or something else. So not a bad practice to do this next step that Eric's going to walk through.
Yeah, just do a double check for sure. So you'll come in, you'll enter your make, model, the steering type, and then you're going to come in and you're going to enter each of these measurements. And what we're doing is we're trying to help the 2020 understand where the GPS globe is actually positioned, so that we know how to model the raw data that's being fed to it. We know that this globe is at a certain coordinate, and when these coordinates come in to that GPS globe, now we know how far to offset from the center. We know how far to offset to the rear axle, to the pivot point, and back to the seat exits. So we want to make sure that we enter all these in, and we double check to make sure they're correct. The planter type, we want to change and make sure that these measurements are entered properly as well. So frame type, remember I am set up as a Kinsey with pushers, so I'm going to go to a dual front. My 1790 or case 1240s would be back here dual rear. Could I be a center trailing? But what we're going to do now is we're going to verify each of these measurements. So a couple quick notes in this page. The pivot point is where we want to measure to, even if we have a 2-point. So if we have a 2-point pivot, what we want to do is we're going to measure from the rear axle of the tractor back to the pivot point, not to where the 2-point connects. And we're going to go from the pivot point back to the wheel distance and the rear rows as well as the front rows. This is our common denominator right here. So once you enter each of these measurements in, now what we're going to do is we're going to come into either row flow or V-drive setup on the right-hand side. And you can see right now that this would not model correctly the way that I'm set up, because rows 17 through 32 are directly in line with 1 through 16. So that means that I did not set this up properly in the system. So where I would actually want to change this is in the crops tab. I'm actually going to go to crops, and I'm going to go to, actually no, I'm sorry, that is in the Gen 3. That is not in the Gen 2. I will go back into this GPS planter, and then what I'm going to do is I need to change my off-center distances. So if I'm swinging the hitch to one side as I plant, I'm going to be 7.5 to one side, and I'm going to be 7.5 to the other side. Now, when I come in, I know I didn't get one of those right, so I can see that I've just shifted them both over. There's always a bit of confusion on how to get these exactly right. This is a document that I'll make available to each of you on the back side of this if folks have questions on how to set those split planners. But what we're going to do, I'm going to look back at my reference sheet here quickly. My D measurement should be plus 7.5, and my E should be minus. So when I flip that, Now we can see that my rows are properly aligned. Okay, is everybody else still good on audio? I have one that says they lost audio, but I'm getting still good.
I don't have anything else.
Okay. Okay, so once we get our measurements in and set properly, now what we want to do is we want to make sure that we go in and we do our Gpx Offsets Check. So I'm going to come in under my row flow setup or my V-Drive setup. I'm going to come into Gpx Offsets, and here's my Gpx Offsets Check. Now, the other place that you can find this in all of your health checks, really, you'll go to Setup, you'll come underneath Systems, and you can come underneath Calibrations. Under Calibrations, this is going to show you any swath calibrations that need to be done, motor calibrations, radar state. And if you come under Health Checks, you're going to see right here this Gpx Offsets Check, row flow, delta force, system-wide check. Okay, so step 1 is enter your measurements. Step 2 is run a Gpx Offsets Check, and that's going to be for everybody. And this is an every year thing that we want you to do. What this Offsets Check is going to do is you'll follow the instructions on the screen. You're going to connect the planner. You'll head to the field. I always like to suggest snap an AB line first with your auto steer, because we're going to have you pivoting around and coming directly to your original point in the opposite direction. So if you can lock onto an AB line, that's going to make this process a little bit simpler as you're trying to drive it. So you'll begin by setting the planner down, and you're going to set your flags by the furthest forward set of gauge wheels. So if you're a center trailing planner like a 1770, then you're going to go to the rows that are furthest forward. If you are on a splitter planner like a 1790, 1780, case 1240, you're going to use the furthest forward set of gauge wheels. On a Kinsey planner, you're going to use the pusher rows as your indicator. You'll press enter to save your position. You're going to pick up, you're going to spin around, you're going to come back the opposite direction, and you're going to lock onto your AB line. So give yourself a little bit of a runway as you do this. Don't turn too tight. You can lock in and then begin to drop the planner back down as you're traveling back between those flags. What this step 2 will tell you to do is to press enter to continue when the front of the tractor is between the flags. So that doesn't matter if it's the suitcase weights up front, if it's the front wheels, or if it's the driver in the cab as it goes by. What the second step is doing is just verifying a heading change to the system. I was headed north, now I'm going south. I was headed east, now I'm going west. You are then going to end facing the opposite direction, having pivoted on the exact same spot. So you want to line those gauge wheels up again, have somebody outside the cab obviously helping gesture to get you to that right stopping point. Excuse me. And then stop and hit enter. What this is going to do then is it's going to show you that in the setup, you measured X inches, in this case 256. We measured this much over here. Now, obviously, the demo, we've been driving and so something's not quite right. But if I have a differential here of, say, 15 inches, that means that every swath event is going to be off by at least 15 inches because my model is off by 15 inches. So what we will do is if we're significantly off, we'll double check the measurements. And once you double check those measurements, if you're still off, you need to make an adjustment in the setup to make sure that you match the measured distance. Most commonly, where we see an issue with this is just a bit of a misunderstanding when a nav2 controller is in the mix, because you'll have a GPS globe up on that planner, or on the tractor rather, but you measure the globe and it's actually outputting to the nav2 controller, which is back at the rear axle and maybe off to the right. So that is something that you want to be aware of. You can come in, change that globe positioning to over the axle where the nav is, and now you should be lined up and ready to go. So once we have completed both of those tasks, now we're ready to start to either for row flow, we're going to do a run cal, or for V-drive, we're going to go straight out to the field and we're going to dig. So I'm going to talk to the row flow customers first, and then we'll touch on the V-drive customers next. So this is under Setup, Systems, and Row Flow. Motor configuration is over to the left. We're going to go to swap configuration right here. Under swap configuration, we're going to go to calibration state. Again, you can also find this a little bit more directly through that health checks or that calibrations page. I should have taken you that way. And then you'll see run cal over here to the side. What the run cal is, this will give you instructions. You're going to put hydraulic pressure in the motor, have at least 300 seeds in at least 4 of the hoppers. I'm going to recommend having 300 seeds in all the hoppers myself. Make sure this is done with a singulated crop, so not doing this with soybeans. Do this with corn and a corn disc, and vacuum on. Just make sure to walk through all those initial steps. You're going to press to continue, and you're going to lift and hold your auto load switches. So that is your first and your third switch on that control box underneath. What this test is going to do is it's going to rotate your motors. It's going to drop seed. It's going to turn your clutches on and off, left to right, right to left. And it's going to go in and it's going to calculate from the time we say start to when the first seed starts. And it's going to calculate from the time we say stop to when the last seed stops. So this will go in and it will tell us how long we need to delay or how far ahead of our swap event we need to give the command to get the right action. So we want to run through that test first. On V-drive, you do not have to go through that step because it's always the same drive. It's always the same disc. We already know what the lag time is. So we don't have to predict that by going in and running that motor. So once you've completed that step, now we're going to go out and we're going to dig. So let me actually come back. I've got a slide to illustrate this. Okay, setting timing for row flow and V-drive is largely the same, just -1 step. Enter your GPS measurements. Complete your GPS offset check. Complete a seed run cal, that is for row flow only. You're going to find that under Setup, Systems, Calibration, Run Cal. And then you're going to plant a cross pattern and dig to find your offsets. So the way I recommend doing those clutch cals is I want you to head to the field a week ahead of planting. If you can get out tomorrow, good luck to you. If you got some sand, go ahead and do that. Yeah, little wet, maybe not quite that soon. I'm going to encourage you to shallow up the rows as shallow as you can go so that you're not digging 2.5 inches down to find it. If it's worth the hassle, go in and pull your quick attach Keatons out. So you're not firming the seed to the base of the trench. It might not be worth that much hassle, but just make it easy for yourself to find the seed. If you can tie the closing system up, by all means do it. At least take all the tension off the closing system. Now what you're going to do is you're going to plant one direction, a full swath, and then you're going to come back planting perpendicular to it, or even at an angle is okay. And then you're going to have a start and stop delay, and I've actually mislabeled this, I apologize. As you come in, this will be your stop delay right here. We're stopping, we're saying how far ahead of time we should stop to try to hit this mark. This is actually your start delay here. Obviously, it should be changed. But when you go to start, are we landing correctly here? Once you have gotten out and you have dug and you have measured, now you can go back into that swath calibration page and we can enter those offsets in. So let's show you where to do that. So we're set up, systems. I think we can find this under, actually calibration, swath calibration. And here's our start seeding delay and our stop seeding delay. Now, for those of you that are running row flow, you're going to enter a time period in fractions of a second. And the reason for this, if I come into my start seeding delay, if you want to start seeding sooner, meaning you overlap, or I'm sorry, you left a gap as you were coming out, increase this value. And it'll tell you down here at 5 miles an hour, a tenth of a second is 8.8 inches. So you're going to come in and you're going to adjust those in fractions of a second. On V-Drive, for you guys, it's actually just a measurement in inches. And that's, again, because we know the delay, we don't have to make an estimate. All you're going to do is enter in a distance that you've measured to get that properly set. So let me know if there's any questions on that in particular. Scott, anything to add?
No, I think the good point there is the row flow side, it's time, and on the V-Drive system, it's distance. It's probably the take home there.
Yep.
And distance is a lot easier to calibrate.
Yes, distance is a lot more intuitive than trying to figure out the time. Okay, now let's go back under systems. So we'll get everybody the same page. We'll go setup, systems, and then we're going to come into, let's go either row flow or V-Drive. So you'll have a motor configuration page. For V-Drive, you're going to have rate control sections. And so I'll start with the motor configuration. These motors should already be configured. But what I want you to note down here for row flow, I've got one motor running the rear rows. I've got another motor running the front rows. Now, let me jump back and I'm going to change this planner type. Change this. And I want to see if this will let me get in and see the V-Drive screens. Yes. Here's your population control setup. So you're going to see your rate section 1 and rate section 2. What that very simply means is we can command a rate to this group of rows that is different than this rank of rows right here. So if I'm split left and right, I can command 34,000 here, 38,000 here, or 29 here, and 36 here, whatever I want that to be. So let's say I'm in a seed corn scenario. I could come in here and I might want to list and say that rows 1 and 16 are my half rate for males. And then I could have rows in between that are set up as female rows. And I know I'm not doing that correctly off the top. We're running quick here. And then we could do a third section where we list any of the other rows. So what that allows me to do now, so let's see, I had 2 through 4. So I realized we didn't do that right, but under V-Drive control, I would have the option then to come into multiple set points. It would be right here, and then I could assign an independent population to each of those 3 different sections. So just to make you aware of that option and how that can be used for a seed corn setting. What we did after this last one is a couple guys had some questions on some seed corn settings. We're happy to stick around afterwards and stay online if there's anything specific for the seed corn guys that we need to go through with you. I'm gonna change back to row flow here so that my demo works a little bit properly. Actually, what I'm gonna do is let me close it out and I'm gonna restart my demo. Okay. We're slowly starting to figure out the technicals of this thing here. Okay, I think maybe the last thing to really touch on here is how to set downforce with delta force especially. So we'll walk through that a little bit, and then if there's anything specific then, Scott, that you have to add or anything else we should go through, we can take those questions too. So let's talk setting downforce for a moment. What I want to go back to is this idea of setting the proper soil density using that gauge wheel. So this starts by setting a target. So I'm going to come into delta force, and I'm actually going to start in custom mode. Again, this demo won't let me enable delta force, but we'll start in custom mode. And I'm pretty well going to have everybody start in custom mode. If you are a Deere, Kinsey, or AGCO style planter, meaning you have a standard gauge wheel, not a reduced inner diameter gauge wheel, you're going to start at a 130-pound target if you're in conventional till. And I'll explain a little of the method to my madness in a moment. If you are on a CNH planter, you have a reduced inner diameter gauge wheel. You have more relief on the inside by that disc opener. The soil heaves up a lot looser. You need to carry a little bit more weight to make sure that we're actually holding the sidewall open and not letting it collapse back in on us before we get the seed to the bottom of that trench. So it's not a negative per se, it's just something you've got to be aware of when you're managing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually bump your target up to a 150-pound target in custom mode. Now what that means is custom mode means we are still automatically controlling it, but we're controlling it to something different than a preset. Once you start at your proper place, so 130 pounds if we're in strip till or conventional till around here. If you're in no-till, I'm probably going to tell you to start at 100 pounds. And that's because you're holding more moisture. You're probably a little heavier on density. And what we're trying to do is not over-compact the sidewall. And in that no-till environment, once we get to 100 pounds on that weigh pin, we probably got it open and we probably are holding the trench. Now to evaluate that, we're going to look at the map. So bear with me as I jump to a map here so you can see this. So you enter your preset, and if as you plant, you're seeing a bunch of green, just like this on your field view map, on your downforce map in field view, if you see a lot of green with blue, and you've got blue streaks, we need to go heavier. This is an incorrect pass right here. And the concern is that we are losing ground contact, therefore we're losing depth, consistency, therefore we're questioning whether or not we're still in our moisture line. We've got to have a little bit of extra. The heavy pass up top, this is 200 pounds on those gauge wheels. We're now over compressing that soil potentially, but that's obviously going to depend on how dry or how wet the soil is that we're planting into. So that's the other caveat we've got to think through. The more ideal map looks like this center pass right here. It's going to be green with a little bit of yellow and some red speckles in there. What it's saying is we're not shallow, but we're not over compressing that soil either. And so the overall idea with this is we know if we're going to err, we're going to err a bit heavy, and we can see that from this example. This is 6 locations altogether. This pass here, the average of the light passes in these 6 locations with 54% ground contact, and we get 156 bushel yield, where we're at 100% ground contact through here, we're at 205. Now, when we go in to the correct downforce pass, what you'll notice is right here on the average of those passes, we're 121 pounds. And when we get to the heavy pass, we're an average of 187 pounds. And what you'll see is there is a slight drop off in yield as we get too tight. So the thing to keep in mind is this idea of soil density management. Healthy soil should be 50% solids That's your sand, silt, clay, and your organic matter. And then the other 50% should be water and air, split evenly. So a quick example on this, just as we think through it. What I want you to notice on this right side is we can see our gauge wheels through the entire pass. And I would ask a group, is that what I want to see? Is that good? And guys will hesitate for a moment. But the answer is yes. I do want to see a gauge wheel imprint through my pass. Because if I don't see the gauge wheel imprint, that means that I lost weight on the stop. I don't know if I got to see the depth anymore. So this is 100 pounds of applied weight in this particular instance. On the left side, this is 400 pounds applied, and here's your difference. You can see this very hard spot. We've really compressed that soil, and when we come to emerge, we've reduced oxygen, we've reduced water, we've restricted the root sizing a bit. And now as we do that, we've slowed the germination on this down versus over here on the other side. So what I want to bring to your attention is this idea of the correct sidewall firming force. As all your forces underneath are trying to push you out, we have to have more force from the top side of that row unit to make sure that the net effect is that that disc opener is in the ground consistently again and again and again. And that's the sidewall firming force that we're after. So when you go to set that target with delta force and you set it for, say, 100 pounds, that's 100 pounds that we're trying to keep all the time on that weight band. That's like 50 pounds on this gauge wheel and 50 pounds on the other. We need some firming force. So let's walk through quick a couple of different examples. If we are in very dry soils, here's what we have to consider. Do we have enough firming force to hold that trench open? So if you watch this video in particular and you watch it, it's a bit cloddy, it's a bit dry, and we're caving in behind. What I need to do to try to remedy this issue and get my seed to the bottom of the trench is I need more force to be carried on my gauge wheels on either side. So step one is set kind of that starting target, 130 on standard gauge wheels, 150 when you're on A&H gauge wheels. Then I want you to verify that the map looks good to you. It looks mostly green with some yellow and a few red or orange specks is okay. The third step is I want you to get out and I want you to evaluate the sidewall. The fastest way to do that is if the planter is still in the ground is to look in between where the disc openers have been and where the closing system has not arrived. If you go back and you do not see an open sidewall between that area, we're in trouble. We don't have enough downforce to hold the sidewall, we're too dry. If you go back and you see a sidewall that is very, very hard, it looks like it's slick, you stick a pocket knife in there and it won't move, now you probably want to back off of that target just a little bit. You could lighten up a little if that's what you're seeing for most of your distance. Or you might want to reconsider whether you should be in the field in the first place or not, depending on where you're at. So your flip side is wet soil. So dry soil, you might want to bump that target heavier. And then if you get into wet soil, you get situations like this, airbags on half a planter and delta force on the other half of the planter. And now when we come in, when I was digging plants out of the lower area, out of the airbags, we could see where in wetter soils, we compacted that root system, we trapped them in, versus where we handled the soil density better by lightening our footprint, but not losing depth. And we were 7 bushels across the board in that field. So that is the takeaway for setting your downforce, is what you're after is you do need some extra. You do not want to shave your margin to 0. In fact, if you're running delta force, I want you to ignore the margin number altogether. I want you to focus on what your downforce target is, look at your map, and then get out and evaluate the trench.
So you want enough margin, or you want enough downforce, but not too much. We can go too far the other way and create hatchet roots when we really don't want them there. So that's take home on that one.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay, so that was setting delta force. There was one other thing I was thinking that I had maybe missed.
Did we cover
recording inner boundaries? I know you covered the headland.
We did not cover recording inner boundaries. Yes. So if you would like to record boundaries, you could take your 2020. You could take a GPS receiver. You could do this live in the planting tractor if you wanted to. So let's say you've got a new field or you've got new waterways in that have just been added to the field and you haven't driven them. You could go out and drive that inner boundary. Or if you want to put that on an ATV of some sort, you could go out and do that as well. So the way that you would record, you would come into your row flow or your V-Drive setup. You would come into advanced swap tools and you would go to create boundary. So we can go in and we can say we want to do a new boundary. You're going to have a setup offset here on the right-hand side. What that setup offset is wherever your receiver is to the outside of whatever you're using as that exterior boundary line. So if you're on an ATV, I know, Scott, you said this morning you usually do 2.5 feet.
Yeah, on a gator, it's typically, so wherever your globe is, that's going to be your center line.
Yep.
And so if you want to drive to the center, that's fine. But if you'd like to go down the left edge, for example, and just take your own measurements, but for example, it'd be a shift 2.5 feet left, and now your line will get recorded down the left side of your ATV.
So we could do that just like this, 2.5 feet to the left. And now you would drive, keeping that outside left tire as you're heading around that field clockwise, you would record your boundary. So you'd go in, you would hit record boundary, you would start driving. When you get to the end, if you need to start jockeying around, you can go pause. You can jockey around to where you want to go resume, and then you can cancel, you can record again, however you would like to do that. So you could also do that when you are in the actual tractor cab. So let's say that you're wanting to use the left wing of the planter, you're a 40-foot planter, you could come in here and say, yeah, I'm 20 feet, and you could drive with that outside edge of the planter right on that line.
Yep.
Question? Do you have to have a field boundary before you record an inner boundary? I believe the answer to that is yes.
No.
But I don't know. Scott just said
Yep.
no.
No, because I'll be honest with you, in our own operation, we do not, on the 2020 only, but on the 2020 in our own operation, I do not record external boundaries. And the only reason is if you decide you want to get close to the edge, and if you have an external boundary, that outside row will shut off. The 2020 won't tell you it shut off because it thinks it shouldn't have planted it. So in our cases, we use our AB lines to determine where the edge of the field is, but we do record internal boundaries for all waterways, and that works very successful. So you can record just internal boundaries.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for that clarification. Good question. Trying to think, there was one more thing. Something I want to stress for anybody that is running speed tubes. A couple of things on speed tube operation. One is you're going to run your vacuum a little bit higher than you maybe did with just your normal V-sets. So instead of say 20 to 22 inches with a V-set, I'm going to tell you to go for 23, 24 inches of back with that speed tube. The other thing that I want you to verify is I want to make sure that we at least change the feeder wheels every year on those speed tubes. We will improve the spacing just a little bit by replacing those, even if it doesn't look like there's much wear on them, because you'll get seed treatment. They don't grip quite as well. So we want to make sure that we change those out each season. And we've stressed this at our meetings too, is we should really have speed tubes inspected on an annual basis. There's a lot of moving parts. It's very high friction. It will give you a tremendous amount of productivity, but if those parts begin to wear and we do not see it, we can begin to affect the spacing and even, so we need to be very careful with it. The last piece then is just one bit of confusion that can come up from time to time. If you see multiples, if you see doubles when you're running a speed tube, most likely what is happening, most guys will want to drop their vacuum because they say I'm pulling 2 seeds in. You actually probably need to turn the vacuum up if you are doubling with a speed tube. And here's why that is. That VSET meter, once you're at 20 to 22 inches of back, the singulator itself is not going to allow doubles to go by. What can happen, though, is if I don't have quite enough vacuum and I've got kind of a weak hold on that seed, when it comes in and engages the feeder wheels, if the feeder wheels don't grip it well, I can bounce it loose, and now it falls loosely back into those feeder wheels and pulls in with another seed that's on a hole. So it'll look like doubles, and when in reality, what you need to do is you actually need to turn the vacuum up. So it's not a real common issue, but it's one thing to be aware of, and it's a little bit counterintuitive to maybe what you were used to before. I have a field boundary in John Deere Operations Center. Can I export this into the 2020 Seed Sense display? Yes. You can go in, you can export those. It's just a generic shape file to a USB stick, and then plug that into the 2020 and import it. Then remember that you do have to assign those to each field.
You may have to invert them.
Yeah, okay, and there was a comment here as well as we may have to invert them. So that may be something, do we need to maybe get instructions on that and send that out later too?
Let's do that.
Okay.
So what do we mean by invert? So when you pull up your 2020 and you show up the map, so you went and imported them in, or maybe you even drove them. I've seen that happen too. Your map should be green where it's going to plant, and it'll be dark or black where it's not going to plant. And so if you pull it up and you've got these light green waterways across and the rest of the map's black, it's not going to plant. You'll drop your planter in the field and it'll just sit there and look at you. So there is a way we can invert those, and Eric will get that information out as a cheat sheet for us.
Yeah. I've got one question here. Can you give the websites again? Yes, I will. We will actually send those out a little bit later in an email format. The one thing I do remember that I wanted to touch on was smart firmer metrics. Just because it's not on my screen at the moment, I almost forgot it, and that's very, very important. So what I want to point out here first is beginning with, if you don't have the smart firmer metrics on your screen and you would like to get them there, we can go down to the lower right. If you go to your dash view, you can come into either configure your dashboard buttons, which would give you the ability to come in and to change any of these buttons that you see here. So for instance, if you don't need the flip planter button, I may want to come in here, click on that button, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to find furrow moisture. Now in this case, here it is. It will allow me to do it. So that's one way that I could get those metrics in. The other place that I can do this, back from my home screen, if I go to Dash View and configure Classic Dashboard, I can actually go from 4 buttons to 6 buttons. This actually gives me the ability now to go in and change a couple of these buttons, so I've got a little bit more room to work with. So I may want this Clean Furrow and Furrow Moisture button right here. And then I may want my spacing next to it. Now that frees up that other spot, that flip planter button, and I can put in, say, my temperature. So these are grayed out on my screen because this is set up as a row flow planter and the two are not compatible. But the thing that I want to remind you of here, really the most important metric to focus on is this furrow moisture. So where I want you to begin, where I would start off is obviously make sure your population is right, make sure your vacuum is set right. But the first place my eyes are probably going to go is to get this downforce set correctly to begin with, because that is now going to assure that I'm getting the seeds into the right depth. Once I'm getting the seeds into the right depth that I selected, now I want to verify with my furrow moisture number that I am actually into a consistent moisture line. So a quick refresher on what that furrow moisture button is. Furrow moisture will come to you as a percentage, and it is the percentage of predicted weight gain in water that that seed will absorb in a 3-day window. So try to explain that a little bit clearer. If I give you a large flat seed, a small round, and a medium flat or medium round, they all have something in common. Once they absorb 30% of their own weight in moisture, they will germinate and they will start off towards the surface. So what the percentage number that you would see on your screen with that 2020 is if I see 20%, that says that at the depth that you've selected, and if your ground contact is 100%, we're at that depth. But at the depth you've selected, there is not enough moisture to gain 30% in 3 days. You'll gain 20% in 3 days, and you will have some erratic germination. It won't emerge consistently. What we want to see in that case is if we're below that 30%, is we want you to get out and go and adjust your depth handle to put that disc opener in the ground a little bit deeper. So I'd go a 1/4 inch deeper, see if that gets me up to 30. If it doesn't, I'm going to go a 1/4 inch deeper, and I'm going to make sure that once I hit at least 30 or above, that now I'm in a position to be in that moisture line consistently. So anything to add on that, Scott?
Yeah, no, I would, excellent explanation. And I would say, again, to put my farmer hat on here, as I look at Smart Firmer, it's a tool we're learning a lot about yet and trying to figure out. It's got a lot of cool features, temperature, clean furrow, etc. But the one that I can really make a difference of in the cab is that furrow moisture. And I'm a slow learner, so it's taken us 2-3 years here of using this product. You drop the plant on the ground, you go out and dig, yep, we're in good moisture, take off and go. And this year was a great example of that. In 19, you never thought you'd have a dry spot, but we'd worked up some wet areas, came back and planted them after many, many more rains. Surely that's not dry, but when we came through the Smart Firmer, it showed sure enough that those areas were actually dry. We were below that 30% level and germination got hurt. And we've kind of just made a rule, if it drops below 30, let's stop, let's get out and dig, check. Sure enough, we're right at that moisture line. We drop it down a little bit and then keep on going. So these fields got a lot more variability out here than what I guess we'd imagined before we had a tool like this could constantly measure moisture through it. So if you got a V-Drive system on or an SRM-based system on and you're not running any Smart Firmers, it's a pretty handy tool. Put a couple on, just monitor. It's a tool we're learning from. It does have the ability to control, and there's a lot of future things coming, but it opens your eyes to what's going on out there.
Yeah, for sure. I'll touch on clean furrow for a moment, and then I had another question here on how to reverse the direction of the implement, and we can talk on low speed start as well, just to make sure that we get those two things knocked out. Clean furrow right over here on the left. Clean furrow is actually reading how much residue is present in the seed trench alongside of the seed. So the reason this becomes important is we know that residue will wick moisture away from the seed. Any residue that is towards the surface is actually going to shield the surface from sunlight. It's going to cool things down. So we know that we're going to create a potential variation in the emergence environment. The first obvious thing to try to do with that clean furrow number is if it's low, you can drop your row cleaners in, especially with clean sweep. If you can tweak it a little bit tighter, you may be able to move some of that residue out of the way. Just be careful that you don't start gouging with the row cleaner. We're not trying to dig a berm that if we get a rain, we're going to start to change our planting depth as it washes back over the top. We need to be careful with that. There are some fields you're just going to have a bunch of residue, and what that reading might be is when you look at that field view map as well, it might be that you need to adjust something else in the operation from a residue management perspective, whether that would be sizing it better out of the back of the combine, whether that's sizing it better through tillage or leaving it on top versus incorporating it in underneath. You can get creative on how you go in and manage that, but it's more of a metric for you to be aware of for down the road. Soil temperature, obviously there, be careful, 50 degrees, germination stops. We need to be up above that. That's just a simple indicator to tell you where you're at. Your organic matter levels, those organic matter levels are there to lay out zones. You can also go in and control automatically your VSET V drives. if you would like to do that, or your V-Apply modules, if you want to vary the rate based off of organic matter, we can do that on the fly. I'm going to point you to the cloud to look up how to do that, or to reach out to Scott and team on the backside for a quick explanation of that one, just for the sake of time. So let's talk through how to change direction of the planter and our low speed start or a quick start for V-Drive. I'm going to go to my dash view, and I'm going to go to configure dashboard buttons. And in the place of my soil temperature here, I'm going to come in and I might choose, I'm going to choose flip planter. So what that flip planter button does is, if I see that my icon has reversed direction, I can hit that button and it should flip the direction of that icon. So where this is most normally used is as you back up, especially at a little bit higher speed, and you back up a little longer distance, eventually we can get a bit confused on the actual heading that implement is traveling. And so if you hit flip planter, it should reverse the direction. Now, there are times where it will actually flip black, reverse again. We've got to turn swath off. Not ideal all the time. There's some potential ideas on how to address that in the future, but that is an option that's out there right now, is that flip planter button. The other piece then is this low speed start for row flow, or it's a V-Drive quick start if you're running V-Drive. And the difference between those two, for row flow, what we're going to do when you click low speed start, it is going to simulate acceleration for a period of time. In this case, it's 8 seconds, so that when you start to roll forward, it starts the motors very quickly. So we're just simulating accelerations. Really, at the end of the day, as long as your RFM orientation, the row flow module orientation, is entered correctly, it's really not going to do a whole lot for you. It doesn't change a whole lot. For your V-Drive, it's a little different. We have what is called a quick start. So you would click on that button, and it's going to count down 3, 2, 1, and say active. And what it's going to do is it's going to start to rotate your meters and drop seed down to the ground, whether you're moving or not. So it is not designed to give you perfect population. It's just designed to fill in that little gap that you get because of the lag time of forward travel, kicking in the accelerometer, and delivering the seed to the ground. If everything's set correctly, we should start rotation of those motors within about 6 inches of travel, but we still have to wait for that seed to leave the meter and get to the ground. So hopefully that answered those couple questions. With that, Scott, anything to add?
No, I think you covered it quite well. If any other questions come up, we'll, like Eric said earlier, we'll stay online here and can answer them. You can text in or call. We would like to have feedback from you. I know we had a little audio issue here through this call, and the circumstances have caused us to do a webinar this time, but would like to have your feedback. You can text any one of us or our main number as well. Just, hey, yeah, it worked great. Nope, don't ever do that again, or something in between. We'd love to have your feedback so we kind of know how to improve as we go forward here. And I really appreciate your patience. And again, we're here to serve you. Business as usual as far as we're concerned. And anything you need, just give us a holler. And there'll be follow-up materials coming from this, websites and et cetera, some of the sheets that will get emailed directly out to you.
Yeah, very good. We'll stick on the line here for a little bit. If there's any last minute chats that you want to send in or questions you want to ask, you can unmute yourself, and we'll go from there. Wish everybody a safe Plant 2020.
Be safe.